Hey, what's up? It's Tati back with another review. I was so into my review about New Jack that I didn't even realize I was talking for 30 minutes. Now, when it comes to wrestling, I could talk all day, all night. But I forgot to mention that if you want to watch seasons 1 and 2 of Darkside of the Ring, where you can watch it for free. You can watch it on Tubi. Tubi is free. You don't even have to sign up or sign in to watch any of their content. Everything on there is free, including seasons 1 and 2 of Darkside of the Ring. I don't know about season 3. Season 3 is definitely not on there, but I'm not sure where you can watch it for free since I've already watched them and did reviews on that. But if I do see where you can watch it for free, I will post a link down below. Guys, let's talk about one of the most ridiculous ideas in pro wrestling ever, the Brawl for All. So before we talk about the details of the Brawl for All, I think it's really important to talk about two prominent figures in pro wrestling. Number one, Jim Cornette, and number two, Vince Russo. Now, both of these guys were doing interviews for the show, and no, they were not in the same room together, because if they were, there would be World War III. Now, these two guys here, they represent two different types of, types of styles when it comes to wrestling. You got Jim Cornette, who's more into the old school approach. He knows what works and he wants to stick to it. And then we have Jim Russo, who wants to cater more to casual wrestling fans, who wants to add into the mix more reality-based style into pro wrestling, like something that you see in Jerry Springer. And I do think that both those ideas and both these guys being in WWF during the time really helped shape the Attitude Era. And honestly, I really do agree that putting these two things together can be a really great thing. Now, while they're a really good thing for you to mesh those two types of ideas together, some things as far as ideas just did not work. And one of those things being the Brawl for All. Now, how did we get Vince Russo into this? He was writing for WWF magazine, and he would incorporate his ideologies that should be included into pro wrestling. Vince McMahon took a liking to what he was seeing from Vince Russo. He brought him in one day with all the other guys like JR, Bruce Pritchard, Jim Cornette. I know I'm missing a couple of people's names. And he hired him and said that he wants him to be part of the creative team and to help out with, storylines and how to make wrestling much bigger. We also had WCW going on as well. And at some point, you guys already know that WCW was winning the Monday Night Wars. And they really had to do something to just make their show a little bit more edgier, something that would cater to their current fans and also bring in more casual fans. Now, how did the Brawl for All came about? According to Vince Russo, he could not stand JBL. Now, me personally, I do listen to a lot of shoot interviews and everything, and one person that I hear often people talk about being like a bully, being a real life asshole, is JBL. And one day, Vince Russo heard him talking about, he said specifically, if this shit was real, I would whoop all y'all asses up in here. And Vince Russo was thinking in his mind, like, wait a minute, I know at least 10 people up in here that would whoop your ass in real life. And he really wanted to see that come to life. So then he started coming up with the idea of the Brawl for All, and he pitched this to Vince McMahon. How did this even come about? To be honest with you, this is something I would have seen on my table and would have been like, hell to the nah. This is a pro wrestling company, not some type of boxing or whatever like that. But for whatever reason, the idea came about and they went ahead and did this tournament. And to be honest, I think it did more bad than it could have ever done good for WWF. So with the Brawl for All, we had 16 competitors. These are guys who are mid-carders, guys who are basically lost in the shuffle. Around this time, WWF had a lot of wrestlers. I would say a pretty inflated roster or whatnot, and a lot of people was just not getting by the way that they expected to. A lot of these guys had long-term contracts, but wasn't really making the most of their careers in WWF. So now when it came to this tournament, a lot of people wasn't really sure. You're going in the ring and you're having a real fight with other wrestlers, guys who are not trained in any other types of style of fighting, just in pro wrestling, which is completely different than coming in the ring with boxing gloves and just fighting and not having those rules that you have in professional wrestling. Now, when it comes to this whole tournament, a lot of people speculate that the winner was to be Dr. Death. Now, this guy here, while he looked like somebody who could have made it all the way to the end, that actually was not the case. Now, Bruce Pritchard claims that when it came to choosing how these matches were going to go, he wrote everybody's name on a piece of paper and put it in the paper bag. And Savio Vega, who's in the damn tournament, is the one who's picking out. So for every two he picked, those are the people who are going to go against each other with the first round of the tournament. And then based on each, after every two matches, those winners will go against each other and keep going all the way until the finals. Now, a lot of people will say that they don't believe that because of some of the pairings when it comes to this match. So who was in this tournament and what matches did they have? First match was Steve Blackman and Mark Miro. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying in an order of how the names were picked out of this bag. So Steve Blackman is first. Then he goes against Mark Miro, and Mark Miro ends up advancing in that one. Next, we have Mark Canterbury versus Bradshaw. Then Bradshaw ends up advancing. We had Brackus and Savio Vega. Savio Vega ends up advancing. Next, we had Draws. Then he was going against Hawk, and Draws end up advancing. Bart Gunn versus Bob Holly. Now, this right here was a little controversial because they were actually a tag team, part of the Midnight Express. So, Bob and both Bart feel like they did that on purpose to have them go against each other. Either way, Bart ends up taking the win. Next, we had Pierre Ouellette versus Steve Williams, and Steve Williams ended up taking the win. Steve Williams, Dr. Death. Then we have Godfather versus Dan Severn. Dan actually wins, but decided, I don't want to be part of this bullshit no more. Get me out of this tournament. Then Godfather advances. And then the last match is 8-Ball versus Tuco Scorpio. Scorpio takes the win and advances. And that's what we have. And I do feel like maybe some of these are strategic. No one else was in the room other than Bruce and Savio when it came to picking out these names. So we can't really say for sure if they picked this order just to make sure the people they wanted to win in advance would advance. So honestly, I'm not really sure if I believe that. So I forgot to mention that both Steve Blackman and Draws both advanced in their rounds because their opponents were so injured that they could not continue. Now, this was a continuing theme throughout this whole tournament, was that everybody kept getting injured. Now, this was a huge issue because this made fans not happy because it's just so chaotic that it was hard to enjoy. The people who were judging ringside, it's almost as if they didn't even know what the hell to judge because this whole thing was all over the place. The referees had a hard time officiating the matches because they're trained to officiate wrestling matches, and none of the things that was going on in the ring made any sense. So it was really tough to enjoy. And what bothered me watching this episode is Vince Russo watching back some of these matches at his home, and he's sitting there and he's like, well, you know, as a casual fan, I would totally enjoy this. And I'm like, bro, what the hell are you talking about? What about this is enjoyable? You know, they're pro wrestlers and they are trained to do a certain type of skill. Now you put them in a ring to do something that they just not skilled at, and you expect people to enjoy this? Of course the casual fan's gonna come in here and just not knowing anything about wrestling is gonna enjoy this stupid shit that's going on. I just felt like Russo was so relaxed in this episode of Darkside of the Ring. It just seemed like he was not really aware of what the Brawl for All did for a lot of these guys, including some of them being so injured that it cost them their careers. So like I said before, Dr. Death was the pick that the guys from the back wanted to win and thought was going to win the whole thing anyway. Now, this is not wrestling, and whoever would win is going to end up winning. So we had a really unlikely person to take this thing all the way home. Now, for the quarterfinals, we had Mark Miro versus Bradshaw. Bradshaw took the win to move on to the semifinals. We had Savio Vega versus Draws. Draws takes the win, so now it's Bradshaw versus Draws in the semifinals. Then we had Bart Gunn versus Dr. Death, and surprisingly, Bart takes the win here. Now, before his match, as he's getting ready all day, everybody is just getting in his face, talking about how he's going to lose. Everybody was picking on him or whatnot, and he felt a fire up his ass to win this match. So the match comes on. Everybody in the back is watching. Everybody wants to see how Dr. Death is going to win this. And surprisingly, he ends up losing via KO. And it's absolutely insane because no one thought that this would happen. And when Bart gets to the back, nobody is there. Anybody that he actually saw would not say a word to him. As a matter of fact, he thinks that Vinnie Mac was so mad about him winning this thing that cost him a lot of opportunities in the WWF. After this match, we do have Dr. Death, who had a lot of injuries, and he had to have extensive rehab. And also, within a year, he was out of the WWF. After that match, Jim Cornette meets with Vince Russo and told him that he was a dumbass and all this shit. You know how he is. And he said that he had cost the company $5 million. That's what they had writing on Dr. Death. They expected a lot of big things from him. And now that he was injured, and in the long run, within that year, he could not continue his wrestling career. And to be honest, this whole thing was Vince Russo's idea, and he cost them all that money, and he cost them a lot of talent too, because a lot of these talent were so injured after these matches they couldn't perform the way they could anymore, and some of these guys had long-term contracts, so this was definitely an issue. Now, one more match after this was Godfather versus Scorpio. Godfather takes the win, and he is going to the semifinals against Bart Gunn. So now we had these semifinals, Bradshaw versus Draws. Bradshaw ends up winning with having more points than Draws. Now, this one's a little more controversial because people say that Draws should have won this because he would have had more points than Bradshaw had. Everything that he'd done was accredited for the way it should have been, so he would have had more points and ended up advancing to the finals. I did look for this match. I could not find it, so I can come down to my own conclusion if that was the case or not. But I couldn't find it. And either way, Bradshaw did end up advancing to the finals. The next match we had on to the semifinals was the Godfather versus Bart Gunn. Now, Godfather said coming into that match, he was overly confident and high as fuck, but he really wanted to win this match, and he ends up losing via KO. He said his wife was so upset at him because she wanted him to make it to the finals and win that $75,000. Back then, $75,000 was way more money than what it is right now. Aside from him not winning that match, he also had a leg injury where his leg was purple. He even showed the picture, and it got infected, and he had to, you know, stay on the shelf for quite some time because of those injuries. Now, so many people, they did end up getting injured, and like I keep seeing Vince Russo keep talking about how great of an idea this was. You know what? I think it could have been much better had they had more stricter rules going into this thing. If it would have been much more organized or whatnot, so it wouldn't be so chaotic. If they had did that, maybe it would have had a much better outcome than what it did. So now we're on to the finals. It is Bart Gunn versus JBL, and JBL got knocked the fuck out and lost this match. Now, I know anybody who is anybody was happy that JBL lost this match. To be honest, I remember this back in the day. I honestly was gunning for the Godfather to make it to the finals, but that did not happen. Either way, I do feel like Bart Gunn does not get enough recognition for this whole thing. He actually really looked like a badass in the end of this whole tournament, and it should have made his whole career much better than what it was, and unfortunately it was not. Did he get a $75,000? Yes, he did. He got also a golden pair of boxing glove. Now, one of the things that people thought they were going to get was a chance to go against Stone Cold Steve Austin. 1998, Stone Cold Steve Austin was red fucking hot, and he was the top guy. So now these mid-carders, obviously, they had something to fight for. It's not just about the money or anything like that. These guys made their livelihood with pro wrestling, and yes, they want to make it to the top. So imagine you win the whole tournament, and now you're going to be facing the top guy in the whole company, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Does that end up happening? Hell no. So no one expected that Bart was going to end up winning this to begin with, especially Vinnie Mac, who at that point seems to be upset that that was the winner of the whole tournament. He had absolutely nothing for Bart. Matter of fact, Bart was home after the tournament for quite some time with nothing to do until he gets a call. And that call was about him going against Butterbean, who was a boxer at that time, at WrestleMania 15. And he says yes to it. Butterbean at that time was someone who had a lot of mainstream success, and he was successful for having a lot of wins as a boxer. But, you know, at the end of the day, Butterbean ain't Stone Cold Steve Austin, you know? So now Bart, he takes this match, and now he's going to train as a boxer to go against Butterbean. Now, to me, I don't feel like this was something that I would book. Like, I understand Vince McMahon, when it comes to WrestleMania, is a showcase of the Immortals, and he wants to come up with all types of crazy ideas when it comes to this. But if you would have told any of these guys that at the end of this tournament that that's what they were going to get at WrestleMania, a match with Butterbean, half these guys would have not done this tournament at all. So now Bart has trained like crazy to be able to go against Butterbean at WrestleMania. However, we know the outcome to that. He loses via KO. He had no chance in hell, to be completely honest. I'm surprised he even lasted a few seconds in this match. He ends up losing, but unfortunately after that he realized that there's like no future for him. There's no going back after this whole tournament and him losing against Butterbean. He just didn't see anything once it comes to this. Now, after this, he does go to All Japan Pro Wrestling, and then he decides to have a career with MMA. Butterbean also goes on to do MMA, and then at some point, someone had pitched a match for him to have a rematch with Butterbean. However, they wanted that match in 4 days. And Bart told them, look, I'm not doing it unless you guys give me 12 weeks to prepare myself and train before having a match with Butterbean. They obviously said no, and nothing came about it. And to be honest, when you really take a look at what happened to these guys' careers, it wasn't really successful as far as long-term goes. Now, I know this isn't something that's necessarily wrestling, but it did take place in a wrestling company, and usually with wrestling, you want to put your wrestlers in situations that's going to help elevate them, and I don't think that elevated anyone here. Now, out of this whole roster that was in this tournament, the only one who really not necessarily benefited from this tournament but ended up having a decent career is JBL. You know, his career did go on with the WWE for quite some time, and he even was doing commentary for them at the end of his career or whatnot. So out of everybody, he's the only one where it just seems like long term, not due to the tournament, but you know, he ended up having some success with WWE, and I do think it's unfortunate. At the end of the episode, they do talk about Draw's injury that he had. No, it's not connected with the Brawl for All, but they just wanted to talk about how like a lot of people who participated did not benefit in any type of way. They talked about how he had that injury. Him and D'Lo both were on this episode, and they talked about it. D'Lo really looks sad about it, even though it was like over 20 years ago. He's still deeply hurt, and you can tell by looking at him and hearing in his voice like he's deeply sorry. However, Draws, he's in a wheelchair and he can't do much for himself. I believe he's a quadriplegic, so he can't do anything from the neck down. But he's been in such high spirit the whole episode, and he even talks about, you know, yes, that happened to him and it was unfortunate, but he learned how to live in another way. And I'm so glad to see that he took something that was definitely a tragedy and made it into something where people don't need to feel bad for him. Obviously, he was not in that situation before that match, but he learned how to live, you know, life with being a quadriplegic, and he really seemed happy in this episode. I don't think he was pretending on camera or whatnot. He really seemed like he has grown into his situation and is really happy with life. So I was glad to see that. The only thing that really pissed me off with this episode is that Vince Russo still in the very end seemed to just think that all his ideas were the best ideas in pro wrestling, and everything that he did was for the best. While I do agree that some things were great, this one right here they could have done without. Now, even though he says everything that he did was all that, now he said, looking back at it, the Brawl for All, he would not have done it now that he knows some more information about CTE. A lot of these matches ended up with KOs, and these guys were literally punching each other in the heads or whatnot to knock their opponents. So he feels bad when he thinks about that aspect of the matches, now that he knows how severe a condition like CTE can be. Guys, thanks so much for watching my review. I will be back with episode 5. If you want to go watch it, go check them out on Tubi. Season 1 and 2 are there. Bye.